So when we do that, when we make that shift, we look at the organization actually the way we look at a healthy individual. We look at a healthy individual holistically. We need to look at the organization holistically. We need to take an integrative approach in any actions, and I'll say more about that later. It's not just about a new program. It's actually how all of the various initiatives you have fit together to encourage well-being and performance. The thinking has to be long-term. This is not something you can accomplish in the next quarter. Don't even try. You can get started, you can set the groundwork, but this is definitely ongoing. And finally, it is entirely strategic. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that basically, in the same sentence, when you talk about a healthy organization, you are talking about the well-being of the individuals who are in the organization. You're also talking, at the very same time, about the performance and the success of that organization. And there is a ton of research that makes that connection between well-being and performance. And there's probably a week-long series of seminars on each of these little bubbles that really goes in depth into how people in organizational learning or human resource management or social responsibility, or the one I really like now is POS. You might wonder, what is that? That's positive organizational studies. How many have noticed in the last few years more attention being paid, just in the media, to the topic of happiness? Okay? Happiness research has taken off like crazy. And that whole mindset has actually been applied to studying organizations. And instead of saying, how do we diagnose problems? It shifts in thinking. It's not, how do we diagnose a problem and really kind of, sort of get immersed in the problem? It's, how do we collectively find solutions? Instead of saying, oh, we're beset with these weaknesses in our HR system, it's saying, how do we build on the strengths that we have? So in other words, it's taking a much more positive, capacity-building, future-oriented approach. And guess what? This is the best way to change an organization. So that's one, only one. Let me go down to the learning organization bubble. And, I've spoken at a number of conferences and workshops on organizational learning, and I kind of flipped the message around because, we can talk about what a learning organization looks like. How many of you in your organizations have some kind of program or strategy or system that encourages learning, organizational learning? Sure. This is big. This is, but here's the thing. It's often treated quite separately from wellness and health, but it's exactly the same. So let's take an example. Trust and respect. Big themes that came up in the two earlier presentations by Martin and Jody. Can you imagine an organization where people are actively learning, which means sharing knowledge with each other, if there is no respect and if they don't trust each other? Well, the obvious answer is no. And I remember, just to give you an example here, I remember hearing a presentation by an executive from Xerox who was at one of these learning conferences, and he said, we sell these huge knowledge management systems that businesses buy, and they're very expensive, that businesses buy to encourage more knowledge generation and sharing. And he said, when we first start discussions with a client, sure, we look at whether they can pay for the system, but the first thing, this is the litmus test of whether the system is going to succeed, because of course Xerox wants their products to be successful when they're applied. The first thing we look for is the level of trust in the organization. Because if it's a low trust environment, even our best system isn't going to work. And that to me was a very telling connection between well-being, psychological well-being, and huge performance issues, right? Let's go around to social responsibility. I'm sure every organization in this room, especially the private sector businesses, have very clear and well-communicated commitments and statements and annual reports around social responsibility. I mean, and there are some leading examples among Alberta companies that are doing this. Those are very values-based. They're rooted in a certain ethical stance about not just wanting to give back, but actually to be part of the community and to develop ongoing and very fruitful relationships with the community. And to encourage employees to volunteer, and companies give time off. Well, that's a kicker. Because I remember, as a consultant, I've worked with a number of corporations going into their head offices, and companies that have won awards for their charitable contributions and are committed to being very socially responsible and supporting employee volunteering. But you quickly learn from discussions that they have a very hard-driving culture. People are routinely putting in 10, 12-hour days. They don't have time to take their kids to the hockey rink, never mind taking that Friday afternoon off to volunteer at the food bank. So, that's the connection between well-being and performance, and seeing the way that an integrated approach can help you bridge some of those separate areas. The final point I want to make is around the service profit chain, and Martin kind of alluded to this, talking about, you mentioned a couple of big retailers going in and the experience. Well, there's a whole stream of research, and this stuff is published in the Harvard Business Review, about how the most successful businesses that deal direct, that have customer service really at the core of what they do, develop very, very strong, a very strong sense of ownership, and that's the word they use, among their employees and their customers. And the number crunching from studies of this is the service profit chain, show that it's that sense of ownership among employees, which is cultivated by a really supportive, enabling, healthy culture, that is the key in the sense of ownership among customers. And this is, there's all kinds of stuff that's come out recently on that. So what I'm doing is really coming at all of this from an organizational perspective and saying, this is not just about health. This is about, certainly more broadly, individual well-being, but the capacity of people individually and collectively to perform at the kind of level that organizations need to be truly and sustainably successful. That's the issue.